A teen with socially crippling fear of others is put into an institution where he finds healing through therapy and relationship with a girl suffering from dissociative identity disorder in the 1962 Frank Perry film David and Lisa. And that's the movie we're digging into this week on Movie Bones. How many institutional-style films have you seen, Ryan? Just asking.
3 or 4.
3 or 4, okay. So it's still kind of a small genre for you, and it is for me, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I asked because, for me, I searched Google earlier, and I wanted to see what other kind of films are out there in the same genre, just stuff that takes place in and around, psych wards. And I'm kind of get a picture of why I don't have a very big repertoire in that area. It's because, 90% of them are all horror movies. And not just like horror, but it looks like the ones that are the kind that push the envelope of these psychological / maybe even supernatural boundaries. And it's just not something I fall into. But what makes up the rest of the 10%, if you take away the Patch Adams movie and a few of the other, I think there's one with Michael Keaton that was also humorously based. If you take those away, the rest, what's left is this very small sliver that's like the film that we have today. Which is David and Lisa. It's a film that's set in contemporaneous 1962, where we meet David Clemens. He's a high-strung teen, deathly afraid of being touched by others. He's in the process of being admitted to a school/mental ward for troubled young people. He meets his therapist, Dr. Swinford, played by Howard Da Silva. He's a compassionate and understanding professional who challenges David's conceptions of therapy built upon many previous failed attempts to treat him. He also bonds with another patient with dissociative identity disorder, which, as I understand it, is not schizophrenia. I think they're not the same thing. Even though I think David at one point calls her schizophrenic, I don't think that's how they do that now. Her name is Lisa Brandt, who's got that disorder, and the story progresses through David's treatment, running in parallel with his growing relationship with Lisa, and that's the basic setup. I mean, it's a very simple setup, Ryan, and I have to say I was really glad to see a film like this dodge so many expectations that you kind of get from the therapist and patient point of view. The therapist is not a bad guy, I have to get him. I'm thinking the people in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, if you've seen that Jack Nicholson film from the 70s, very classic, where the people who are offering the treatment are part of the problem, the institution itself is the problem. In this case, that's not the case. And I really like it for that first and foremost. I can't really think of many other examples of that kind of thing, but except for maybe Good Will Hunting with Robin Williams. That's a really good example of having a positive representation of therapy and the person being treated. There are countless films out there. Yeah, I would actually like to see more films like it. But what do you think?
So you hit on something already that I was going to bring up, which is awesome. Yes, this is one of those films that actually paints this in a good light. And by good light, I mean, the people aren't psychopaths. And I'm talking about the patients.
Yeah.
The helpers, the doctors, or the therapy people, or the therapists, those that are helping out, treat the characters like they're their own people. They help them. They're all you're almost expecting one of them to be the worst because of what you've already brought up. The other films that we have in this kind of niche genre. Yeah. Usually one of the caregivers is bad. They're abusive. They're manipulative. All these other things. And none of them are. No. None of them are. They treat the kids, and they are kids. That's what they are. They're teenagers, and they're all treated with compassion and understanding. And for a 1962 film tackling such a big subject what's going on with him, and I'm going to be real with you, what's going on with him is he's likely got OCD. It's not, they don't give a name for what he's got, but I mean, in our world today, we can look at it and go, all right, I could see hints of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and also he seems to be he seems to be highly autistic.
He feels like it's like this case of, if someone were to touch him, he's afraid of death, essentially. But also not just death, but the pain of actually reaching out to other people. If there's an adversary in the film, it doesn't portray the institution as the source of that antagonism. It's actually like, and specifically not just his family, but his mother. The family ends up becoming, not just the source of a lot of his kind of neuroticisms, but also it's revealed to be, it's like, if you take a step back from it, what his mother in particular is obsessed about, this kind of generational thing where coming out of the 50s really is where the obsession with status and the being presented as the perfect family in very materialistic ways, and where do you go to college? If you don't get into this college, what will other people think? How will we be seen by everyone else,
Real quick. There's a line in there that actually made me audibly not shout, but respond to her. And that's like, it's during that scene where the dad, I think she's the one that says it, but his dad says something along, like they're talking about school, and yeah, it was her that says it. And he says, "Oh, what about going here?" And she says, like, something along the lines of like, "No son of mine," or "You don't expect him to get, like, he won't get anywhere with a public school education."
Yeah, I know. Right.
And I shouted at the TV.
I went to public school. Rutgers University is where I ended up going to college. And it's like, that's not some sham college, But it wouldn't matter if I went to Rutgers or like Vo Technical School, really. It's because then the husband comes back with, well, I went to public school, and you deigned to marry me, basically. And it's like, oh, this is first of all, healthy relationship, She comes out with this thing where it's like, you are nothing but a stepping stone for me. I needed you. Because men are the ones that's seen as the wage earners. I had to marry a man who was going to advance, and you did that for me. But now that you've done it for me, I'm going to take it myself. I'm taking the reins, and this is the next step, and I am the head of the family now, and nobody else's opinion matters. That's basically where she's coming from.
We have to look at this from a more of a 1962 perspective with what I'm about to say. I think the movie does a really good job of subtle playing that she is probably the cause of all of his issues. And that's not to say that some issues just can't come about, through in other ways, like hereditary issues. By that point in the film, you're going, oh, okay, so she's the problem. It does a good job at the very beginning. And again, put yourself in a 1962 mindset. She doesn't shoot him off. She's more worried about him, or she appears more worried about him at the very beginning of the film. So it doesn't paint her in a good light, but it does a good job of not, of making you not suspect that she might be an issue for him, a trigger for him. But then you realize that after this whole dinner scene, it's like, oh, okay.
And it lets you go back. That's a really nice thing the film does. If you go back after that point in the film and with that understanding, and you go back and watch the first scene again, or the first several scenes that she's in, you start to see those scenes in a new light. Her care and concern, and the things she's cared over and concerned over regarding her son, are really about more of it. You could say that it's more about appearance,
Yeah.
And so all of that's just for keeping up the facade. But again, it's hidden very well from the audience until you get to that point later. That's a good amount of subtle writing right there. This film is kind of a reaction in many ways to the kind of very stifling, image-heavy scenario you had in a lot of 50s culture, where everyone had the perfect family. You had the mother, the father, and the 2.5 kids, and you had the car in the garage. You have dad smoking a pipe. It's very perfect image-oriented stuff. But the 50s really leaned into it. And here comes the 60s now, starting to look back at the 50s and saying, you know what? We had some real issues. Things were kept under the radar. You just don't talk about those kind of things, those kind of emotional things. You don't open up like that. And this film's like saying, no, actually, we need to do that. This actually has to be made a priority now, and that couldn't be more clear in like the character of the therapist. I think what's his name, Dr. Swinford. And even Dr. Swinford is so kind of modeling good behavior in terms of what good kind of healthy interactions go like, because he's very self-deprecating. He knows his own humanity, and he's very open with his own failings. And he's also saying, and even there's a great line when I think it's when Dave is talking about how can hate and love, because he's hating and loving his pain. He feels this contrast between the hate he feels for his parents, but also the love that everyone expects you should have for your parents. And he comes back with, well, as you get older, you start to realize, that your parents are kind of messed up too. And it's not to say that those failings are, that you can excuse them and say like, oh, it's all okay, because it wasn't. But you can at least understand from a human level that I have that potential and often fail at it too in different ways, because that's what we're always doing in life, right? We always have to keep reevaluating ourselves.
So this is one of the other things this movie does really good. Mental illness makes you uncomfortable. It shows how uncomfortable it can make other people when you're dealing with someone else's mental illness and everything. I think it does a good job of that. And it's not about being off-putting. It's just about being outside of this quote-unquote norm. And I'm not saying that the quote-unquote norm is necessarily a good thing, but it does a good job of like representing what it's like for people with mental illness, especially extreme forms of mental illness like this, in the outside world and everything. And I was watching the film too, and I made a joke. And I wouldn't seriously do something like this, but I made a joke to my wife. We were watching this film, and there was like a couple scenes where David, he comes across, he does a great job. He's a great character in his own way, but he comes across so arrogant at times. Like when he walks into the room, he's the smartest person in the room. He's got it all figured out. He's the only one really thinking and everything. And he just lets you know how much better than you he is. And of course, that's, you learn that's from your mother. Anyways, this is what I'm getting at. This is a little uncouth of me to say. But there was one point we were watching and he was being this way. And I just looked at my wife and I was like, I would touch him right then and there. The moment he starts doing this to me, I would just touch him and watch him have a meltdown.
He's like, just watch him explode, right? It's like putting sodium in water, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We haven't even talked about the other half of the film yet. The girl, Lisa, she's in the title, right? Lisa is she's got like this kind of dual personality thing going on. It's not, like I said, it's not schizophrenia. I forget what it's called now. I read it earlier, but
if anything, you'd put it as close to dissociation identity disorder as possible.
Yeah. That's what it is, essentially. So
DID is what a lot of people call it today.
Yeah.
Now, people used to call it multiple personality disorder, but I think the term is kind of like evolved because so I will say that the science on this phenomenon isn't cut and dry. There is a belief that there is something, and I don't want to take away from people who feel like they have it or who have struggled with it in their own way. But I do know that the science on it isn't as clear cut as like other disorders. But, instead of like I wouldn't say rapid fire switching personalities, you disassociate from your conscious self and a subconscious part of you takes over. And it's very intriguing. There's one person who I've followed off and on for the better part of like 5, 6, 7 years. It's this girl who she supposedly or did have like 3 or 4 different personalities. Like one of her personalities talked American and she's from England. It's just like dialects that she would not normally have been around to perfect it, and she could perfect it. She's actually, quote unquote, cured. This is the kind of situation where she'll always, have deal with it in one way or another. But they were like, the cure for it is to bring all of the personality, kind of like a puzzle that's not put together. And then eventually you're trying to put all the pieces back together to make the whole picture. That's just kind of to explain what it is. And that's what they're going for in this film. I actually think they do one of the better showings of what DID is like. Like in other, like films like M. Night Shyamalan's films, Split. I like that film, but I've seen people from that community saying like, look, that's not how this works. Yeah, there are triggers. She gets triggered. You see her triggers, or like what triggers her in the film. And you can I think she does a good job of like showing what it's like to disassociate, where she kind of has like this blank expression and then her demeanor is different.
Yeah.
And everything.
I do think that the ending was a little bit kind of, I mean, you can see where, she did step on a trigger of his, even though by that point he was getting better. And it causes a backlash, and then she gets a backlash by running away. And it causes the climax of the film, which feels like it could have happened anytime, I suppose. But
see, that's one of my, not issues with the film, but I will say where it seems like wherever you're going, I can agree with where you might be going. The moment that they're introduced to each other, I'm going to say it's obvious. It's like, okay, so she's going to be the first person that he's going to allow to touch him. It was just a foregone conclusion to me. That's going to happen. The film knew that. I think probably where the story stutters a little bit is, how do we get there? And how they get there, I think is fine. I kind of wish, I will say personally, I wish it would have been done differently. I think I would have liked it if maybe she was the one reaching out and he reluctantly allowed her to touch him, but was warm to the idea and everything. Really quick, warm to the idea. But yeah, it kind of like, we have to get there. How do we get there?
I noticed there are various points in the film that he was working up to it. He almost finds himself casually connecting with her. He pulls back at the last moment, but it's very subtly done. And I thought that was really neat too. Just kind of a few interesting notes on the cast. The guy who plays David, do you know anything else he was in?
But yes, I did know. I was like, oh, I remember him. It was my wife that actually didn't know who he was because she didn't remember that movie.
I can't let you do that, Dave. Open the pod bay doors, Hal. Yeah. Yeah, he was David Bowman in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I did not put that together until I looked it up. When you see it, it's like, oh yeah, that's him. And his name is, I'm going to butcher this, Keir Dullea. I'm doing the best I can. That's his name. And but he went on to star in 2001, and that's pretty much the only thing I think I've ever seen him else in. But he's a good actor.
He was in the next one too.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't think I've seen him anywhere outside of a 2001 film before this. The other actor I was going to make mention of that, in a very different way, has a kind of a less notable career, Clifton James. He plays a smaller role as one of the institution's hired helpers who has a scene or two with Lisa. And I looked him up and it's like, it's the same guy. He's the guy, if you're familiar with the James Bond franchise going all the way back and you go back to the Roger Moore days, especially the really, really cheesy, corny Roger Moore James Bond films. He played the racist, stereotyped Southern police sheriff, J.W. Peppa, who I think had to been given direction to act like a more buffoonish version of Chief Gillespie from In the Heat of the Night or something for that. But it was a much less dignified role than the one he has here. And unfortunately, it's probably the more high-profile one of the two. So... Yeah, I mean, so how are you going to rate this one, Ryan?
Okay, so I did have one. There's one slight issue that's going to knock this down for me, and that is this movie is a character piece, folks. And I'm going to be brutally honest. There was one point in this movie that I was like almost out. And by almost out, I mean like my eyes were heavy because there's a lot of conversations, which is not a bad thing. I want to make that very clear. It's not a bad thing. I like character pieces, but I was not prepared, and it just kind of like, it moves slow at times because of the conversations part of it. It is a good film. It is, like I said, it is character driven. It explores some really good, deep themes, and it doesn't explore them in a way to exploit them. It explores them in a way to better understand them, while giving respect to this whole issue, all of these issues. But again, it can feel like it's only an hour and 30 minutes. And there was one point I was like, this feels longer than an hour and 30 minutes. So for me, it belongs in a museum.
The way I put it is it's a very mild, easygoing piece that strategically emphasizes its drama through quiet moments of dialogue and reflection rather than through explosive outbursts, which isn't to say it doesn't have those outbursts too. It's just that it's that the meat of the film comes through its reflections rather than its melodrama. And I wasn't expecting that. So if you go in not expecting that, and I didn't expect it initially, but on reflection, this is on reflection now. But I think that between the all of everything you said that was good about it, in terms of the characterizations, the kind of subtle use of character and exploration of psychotherapy of its particular character, but also for me, the exploration of themes that have to do with the culture of the time, changing from the 50s, moving forward to the 60s. And a lot of which, those kind of reflections can actually be applied today, I think, because we are, this country especially, as I see it, we're constantly looking for what is our meaning, and the more that society changes and the faster it changes. And Western society is changing very quickly, at a very quick rate, and it's always getting faster. We are always having to ask ourselves that same question: who are we? And I think this movie does a good job of that, trying to figure out that reflective process. I actually went as far as trust me on this. So, because I will be coming back to it reasonably often enough to earn it a trust me, I think. So that's our verdict, folks. And at this time, of course, we'd like to remind the folks out there that we encourage you to watch the films alongside us, even before listening to us talk about it. We're on a journey together, so like, subscribe, comment with your own thoughts, and of course, follow us on your favorite podcast purveyor of choice, so you always know what next week's viewing adventure will be. And of course, to tell us what we got wrong, and what movies you'd like to see us cover in the future. And on that note, Ryan, what is up for next week?
Next week it's going to be a more action-packed film, folks.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We will be covering the man, the myth, the legend, the Zorro, specifically the Mark of Zorro.
Yeah, we're watching. So Zorro's it for next week. Looking forward to that, Ryan. I don't think there's much else to say. So I guess until we see you guys next week, and I'll say it to you, Ryan, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye, folks.